In this part, we're going to look at another example which will help further understand how pricing and production decisions are made in the simplest form of oligopoly, which is referred to as duopoly. So here, the example refers to cell phone duopoly in a small town. I already explained to you that in the case of duopoly, there are two firms operating in the market. So here we are talking about the cell phone market in a small town where there are 140 residents. The good that we are talking about are cell phone services, which provides unlimited minutes and free phones. Now, what you see over here is a demand schedule for cell phone services in this small town. And here we are assuming that there are only two firms, Singular and Verizon. And each firm cost structure is as follows. So the fixed cost is 0 and marginal cost is 10. So in the previous example, we made the simplifying assumption that total cost is 0, but now you can see that that is not the case. Marginal cost is 10, which means that each unit of output which is being produced, there is a cost attached to it. So in this panel below, what you see is the computation of the total revenue, which is computed by simply multiplying price times quantity. And in the next column, we have the cost, which has been computed using this information here, that marginal cost is equal to is 10. So you can see that when 140 units are being produced, there is no fixed cost in production, but there is a cost attached to each unit of output which is being produced. So if you're producing the first unit, the additional cost that you incur on it is $10. Hence, if you're producing 140 units, the total cost on these on this 140 units will equal $1,400. Similarly, as Q increases to 130, you can similarly work out that the cost associated with it is going to be $1,300 and so on. So likewise, you can compute this entire cost column using this information here, which says that the fixed cost is 0 and MC is 10. The profit is calculated in the conventional manner where it is equal to is the total revenue minus the total cost. So this way you can compute this entire last column. Now I'm asking the same question, that if this was a perfectly competitive market, what would have been the competitive outcome? And you can see here that the answer has been worked out for you, that the perfectly competitive outcome, or in a perfectly competitive market, the production and output level is determined where the market demand curve cuts the market supply curve. So the market demand curve is the same as the price line, and the market supply curve can be proxied by the MC curve, which is equal to is 10. So you can simply read from the table that where MC is 10, or when price is equal to is 10, that is going to be the perfectly competitive outcome. So you can see that when price is 10, Q is going to be 120, and you can verify that at this output level, 0 profit is being made. If you recall, in a perfectly competitive market, that is what we assumed, that in the long run, each firm must be earning 0 economic profit. If you start from the bottom, you can see that as quantity increases from 50 to 60, profit is going to increase to 1800. Now, the story is not going to stop here because as long as firms are making profit in perfectly competitive firm, this is going to give incentives for new firms to enter. So when new firms are going to enter, your market production is going to increase. So the process continues. That is, new firms will continue to enter until profit is driven down to 0. So you can see that it's happening at this point here again, where quantity is 120, price is 10. You can verify that at this combination of price and quantity, profit is equal to is 0. Now, considering the second possible scenario, if this was a monopoly, which of course it's not, but we are assuming that if this was a monopoly, where would a monopolist operate? We know that a monopolist is going to operate where its profit is being maximized, or in other words, where its MR cuts the MC. So here you can clearly see for yourself that the maximum profit that the firm can earn is 1800, and it occurs at this point where price is equal to is 40 and Q is equal to is 60, and the profit is equal to is 1800. Now coming to the duopoly outcome. Here again we're going to consider two scenarios. In the first scenario, we're going to assume that Singular and Verizon, they act as a cartel. They have colluded together and they're acting as one. So what would be the cartel outcome? I explained to you in the last example that the cartel outcome is going to be the same as the monopoly outcome. So if firm A or B and B, which are Verizon and Singular in this case, if they act as a cartel, if they collude together, both will be producing 30 units of output. The market price is going to be 40, and as a result each firm will be earning 900 as profit. So I have actually laid down the result in the form of this table for you to for your clarity purposes. So this is the starting point here. I'm going to start off with the fact that both A and B, they collude together, and if they're colluding, we have just seen that both will be producing 30 units. Market price is going to be 40. You can work out the total revenue for firm A. The formula for that is price times quantity. So 30 is the production level, 40 is the price, so that's going to be the total revenue. Total cost is going to be 30 times 10, because we know that on each unit the cost which is being incurred is $10. The MC was marginal cost was $10, so just multiply 30 by 10, that gives me $300. So A is earning a profit of 900. Similarly, B is going to produce 30, enjoy a price of 40, and make a profit of $900. Now, if you see for yourself, this is the best outcome for both the parties, A and B. But this outcome cannot be referred to as equilibrium. Why? Because both the parties have an incentive to cheat here. 30-30, although this is the best outcome for both the parties, but there is an incentive to cheat for both the parties. Now let's see that at work in this table here. Let's suppose that firm A cheats and increases its production. So firm A is thinking that firm B is going to remain true to the agreement and will continue to produce 30 units. So firm A decides to be selfish and it increases its production to 40 units. Now you can work out for yourself that 40 is being produced by firm A, 30 is being produced by firm B. That makes a market production to equal 70 units. Now coming back to the table, you can see for yourself that when 70 units are being produced, the market price is going to fall to $35. So now let's figure out the profits which will be made by each of the two firms. So you can see for yourself, I've calculated it for your convenience here. Price falls to 35, so the total revenue for firm A is going to be $1,400. Total cost, since the firm is producing 40 units, the total cost incurred on these 40 units is going to be $400. So profit on firm A is 1,000. Similarly, calculate the profit for firm B. The profit for firm B falls to 750 units. Now, given this outcome, you can conclude that firm A will definitely have an incentive to cheat, because if it cheats, it can actually increase its profit to 1,000. And of course, since party A is deflecting, party B is going to lose out. It's going to, as a result of the cheating which has been done by firm A, firm B's profits are going to fall from 900 to $750. Now, here we are just thinking from the perspective of firm A. Firm B can think in the same manner, right? If firm A can think this way, firm B can think in the same manner. So firm B can retaliate and it can also increase its production. So let's suppose now if firm A continues to produce 40 units, firm B doesn't sit quiet, it also increases its production to 40 units. So firm B has adopted a tit-for-tat policy. So if firm A has increased production, firm B increases its production. You can see that the market production is now 80 units. Now going back to the table, you can read from the table that when the market production is 80, market price falls to 30. So this is going to affect the profits for both the firms. So coming back to the table, you can see that firm B's profit, it increases to $800. So firm B, previously it was earning $750. So of course it's not going to take $750 and be satisfied with this level of profit. It might as well increase its production and get compensated in the form of increase in its profit by $800. But by doing so, firm B has actually decreased the profits of firm A by $800 as well. Okay, so firm A is now also earning $800. Now let's repeat the cycle and think through whether firm A is going to proceed further in this war of production. So you can see that if firm A retaliates and further increases production, so A is now producing 50. I'm assuming that B continues to produce 40. So you can see from the table above that now the market price is going to fall to $25. And as a result, firm's A profit is going to fall to $750. So do you think firm A is going to take this step? Do you think Singular is going to increase its production from 40 all the way to 50? And the answer to that question is no. It's definitely not rational for firm A to increase its production any further, because if it does this, it's actually decreasing its profit. Similarly, if you think from firm B's perspective, firm B is never going to increase its production beyond 40 units. You can work it out yourself that if it increases its production to 50 units, it will actually do itself a disfavor, because by doing that, it will actually reduce its profits. So why proceed further than here? So this is where the game is going to stop. This is where both the parties are going to settle down that, okay, 30-30, although it's, best outcome for both the parties, but we have seen it's quite unstable. Both the parties will have an incentive to cheat. So if they are acting independently, if they are now involved in aggressive competition, they'll end up with this outcome where both are producing 40 units and both are enjoying a profit of 800. Now, if we go back to the table, you can see for yourself that, the green outcome, it specifies the competitive outcome. The pink line, it specifies the monopoly outcome. And this is also the outcome of an oligopoly if Singular and Verizon, they form a cartel, and if that cartel is successful. But I've just shown to you with the help of two examples now that cartels are unstable. There's always an incentive to cheat by both the parties. Now if that happens, we have just seen for ourselves that both the parties will settle when both are producing 40 units. So this is actually going to be the oligopoly outcome. If A and B are acting independently, they are thinking of their own self-interest. So this is the outcome that they're going to end up with. So again, you can see that this outcome is somewhere in between the outcome of perfectly competitive outcome and monopoly's outcome. So this point, equilibrium that we have just identified, there's a special name for this equilibrium. This is called the Nash equilibrium. Nash was a mathematician who actually laid the foundation for game theory or strategic decision making. So in honor of his name, this equilibrium is referred to as the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so the equilibrium of an oligopoly, it's called the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so Nash equilibrium is a situation in which economic participants interacting with one another each choose their best strategy given the strategies of all the others have chosen. Okay, so Nash equilibrium. So 40 is going to be the best strategy for Verizon given that singular is producing 40. So this point is also illustrated over here. So in our duopoly example, Nash equilibrium is that each firm produces 40. Why do we call this the Nash equilibrium? Because given that Verizon produces 40, what is the best strategy for singular? Singular will increase its production to 40 as well. Similarly, if singular is producing 40, the best strategy for Verizon is to produce 40. We have seen through this example that there's no incentive for both the parties to proceed further and increase production beyond 40 units. So at 40, the game ends. Both the parties, they will have no incentive to deviate from this equilibrium. So here we have a small comparison between oligopoly outcome and the outcome of the other two market structures. So you can see that when firm in an oligopoly, if it's acting individually, its Q is going to be greater than the monopoly Q but smaller than the competitive market Q. Similarly, its P is going to be, or the price level is greater than the competitive market price but less than that of monopoly. So it's just a repetition of the same thing, that the oligopoly outcome is going to be somewhere in between the outcome of perfect competition and monopoly. So from a consumer perspective, they would, perfect competition is the best, followed, from consumer perspective, perfect competition is the best because in terms that more quantity is being produced and less price is going to be charged, that the second best is going to be, oligopoly, and the least preferred is going to be monopoly, because monopoly is simply overcharging and producing very less quantity. Okay, now we move on to game theory. Game theory, it's a study of how people behave in strategic situations. So game theory is a very vast topic. It's a part of microeconomics, and it's a field in itself. So this, again, the founder of the game theory was John Nash, who was a great mathematician. So this game theory, it helps to understand how people behave in strategic situations. So for example, if Pepsi is going to increase its price level, how will Coke retaliate, or how would Coke react to it? Similarly, if Coke decides to increase its production, how would Pepsi make its strategic decisions? So in order to explain game theory, one example which is given is that of prisoner's dilemma. This is a very popular game of understanding game theory. So this is a game between two captured criminals that illustrates why cooperation is difficult even when it is mutually beneficial. So the idea behind prisoner's dilemma is that, let's suppose that two criminals, Bonnie and Clyde, they have been arrested for robbery and now they're being interrogated in different rooms. Okay, so again we have two players, so this can be referred to as a duopoly. What you see in front of you, this is called a payoff matrix. The payoff matrix, it simply, it simplifies your life, and it basically tells me that if, for example, if you just concentrate on this payoff matrix, what you see is that Clyde has two decisions to make. It can either confess or remain silent. Similarly, Bonnie can make two decisions, confess and remain silent. Now, each box represents the payoffs. So the first box here represents that if Bonnie confesses and if Clyde confesses, so in that case we are in this first box, Bonnie is going to get 8 years in prison and Clyde is going to get 8 years in prison. Okay, so if you move to the next box here, you can see that this box shows the payoff matrix where Bonnie remains silent. So if Bonnie remains silent, its payoff is represented by this blue triangular region. So Bonnie gets 20 years, and Clyde, if it confesses that yes, we committed the crime, Clyde gets an immunity and he goes free. Similarly, this lower box here represents the payoffs when Clyde remains silent and Bonnie confesses. And the last box here represents the payoff when Bonnie remains silent and Clyde remains silent. So these are like 4 possibilities which are in front of you. Now, if I ask you what is the best outcome or what is the best strategy for both the parties? So the best strategy is going to be where both Bonnie and Clyde remain silent. So this can also be referred to as the cartel outcome. So this box here is actually referred to as the cartel outcome. You can see this is the best outcome. This is mutually beneficial for both the parties. Look, this is not mutually beneficial for both. Bonnie goes free, so Bonnie is, has an advantage, whereas Clyde is getting 20 years in prison. So both the parties will never agree to this outcome. Both the parties will never agree to this outcome. Now, both the parties, if they have a choice between confess and confess, and if they have a choice between remain silent and remain silent, I think this is going to be a better strategy for both. So if both remain true to their commitment, both remain true to the promise that they made each other, that if we get caught and if we are being interrogated in different rooms, the best strategy for us is going to remain silent. Now, if both the parties remain true to that agreement and they remain silent, both will get 1 year in jail, and after 1 year, both can then go free. But again, this is not a stable outcome, although it's the best outcome, but it's very difficult to maintain this outcome. Just imagine Bonnie and Clyde are being interrogated in different rooms. Bonnie doesn't know if Clyde is going to break down and confess. Similarly, Clyde doesn't know if Bonnie, under pressure, under interrogation, is going to break down and confess. So what would be the best strategy for Bonnie, given if it assumes that Clyde, he's very loyal and he's going to remain silent? So if Clyde remains silent, that was the agreement between the two parties. So if Clyde remains silent, what is the best strategy for Bonnie? So you can see that we are now in these 2 boxes below. Bonnie has 2 options. She can remain silent and get 1 year, or she can be selfish and confess and get an immunity and go free. So, Bonnie is definitely going to, because she doesn't know what Clyde is going to do. If she thinks that, if Clyde is going to remain silent, then the best strategy for Bonnie, Bonnie is going to compare its payoff, the best strategy for Bonnie is going to, confess and go free. Similarly, if Clyde confesses, what's the best strategy for Bonnie? So if Clyde confesses, Bonnie is going to compare its payoffs. If she remains silent, she is going to get 20 years in prison. But if she confesses, she is going to get 8 years in prison. So Bonnie would certainly confess in this scenario as well. So, whatever Clyde does, if Clyde remains silent or confesses, the best strategy for Bonnie is going to be to confess. Similarly, think from the perspective of Clyde now. Okay, let me just rub off these additional things now. If Clyde thinks that Bonnie is going to remain silent, what is the best strategy for Clyde? Clyde is now you can see that if Bonnie is going to remain silent, we are in these 2 boxes now. Clyde is going to compare its payoffs. Which is a better deal for Clyde? Clyde would, of course, confess and go free. If the deal is between 1 year in jail and no jail, most probably Clyde is going to go for no jail. It's going to confess and go free. So, whatever happens to Bonnie, he doesn't care. He is just being selfish. He is going to confess and go free. Similarly, if if Clyde, has this thinking, oh, like Bonnie might confess, then we are in these two boxes now. Clyde is going to compare its payoffs, and he's going to see that, okay, it makes more sense for me to confess and get 8 years in jail rather than 20 years. So it will end up confessing again. So you can see here that if Bonnie remains silent, Clyde is going to confess. If Bonnie confesses, the best strategy for Clyde is also going to confess. So what's the conclusion here? The conclusion is that both will end up confessing. That is, this is going to be the oligopoly outcome if A and B, if Bonnie and Clyde, they act independently. You can see that the best outcome was this, the cartel outcome was this, but we've just seen that this is not stable. This cartel, there is very good reason it's going to break down, and both Bonnie and Clyde are there. They're going to save their skin, they're going to be on the safe side, and they're going to confess, because Clyde knows that if it remains silent and if Bonnie confesses, I am going to be in big trouble. I will just go in jail for 20 years. Clyde will never take that risk. Clyde will confess just to be on the safe side, and Bonnie is going to think the same manner, and she is also going to confess. So both end up confessing, and both end up with 8 years in prison. Okay, so now this is going to be a Nash equilibrium. Okay? This is going to be the equilibrium for us in this particular game, and this equilibrium is also referred to as a dominant strategy. Now this is how we define a dominant strategy. A strategy is called a dominant strategy if it is the best strategy for the player to follow regardless of the strategies pursued by other players. Okay, so I've just tried to explain it with the help of these two tables. You can think from Bonnie's perspective. You can just assume the role of Bonnie and think that, okay, Clyde has two options. Clyde can either remain silent or confess. If Clyde remains silent, my best strategy is going to be to confess. If Clyde confesses, my best strategy, by looking at the payoff matrix, is again to confess. So whatever Clyde does, your dominant strategy is to confess. Now similarly, assume the role of Clyde and think from his perspective. Bonnie again has two options, to remain silent or confess. If Bonnie remains silent, your best strategy will be to confess. If Bonnie confesses, your best strategy will again be to confess. So both will end up confessing. So confess is going to be the dominant strategy here. Now if in a game you can find the dominant strategy, that is also referred to as the Nash equilibrium. So this example, it shows that it can get a little complicated when you're thinking on how parties make the decisions in the case of oligopoly, right? Especially when A and B are acting independently, you really have to think through what is going to be the equilibrium, and the best way to get to this Nash equilibrium is by seeing if there is a dominant strategy in this game. And how can you come up with this dominant strategy? You can think in this following manner, that if Clyde remains silent or if it confesses, what's my best strategy? Similarly, think from Clyde's perspective, that if Bonnie remains silent or confesses, what is going to be my best strategy? So in this particular game, we have a dominant strategy where both will end up confessing. Right. So now, one more point that I want to illustrate over here is that when oligopolies form a cartel in hopes of reaching monopoly outcome, they become players in prisoner's dilemma. The first two examples that we did, one was regarding water duopoly and the other was regarding cell phone duopoly. Those examples can be, they can be positioned, or they can be converted into this a game which is similar to the game that we have just played, which is referred to as prisoner's dilemma. It's called a prisoner's dilemma because the best outcome was to remain silent and remain silent, but both the parties are in dilemma. They are they don't know what the other party is going to do, so they end up confessing at the end. So if you remember the example that we just did, the Singular and Verizon example, which are the two duopolists in town, the cartel outcome was 30 and 30. You just see that I have converted that table into this payoff matrix here. And well, I have I'm just depicting two situations here. One is when well, actually here it's capturing 4 situations. Verizon produces 30, 40, Singular produces 30, 40. So there are 4 outcomes which are possible where both the companies produce 30 and 30. Both the parties here, in the last box you can see that both the parties are producing 40 and 40. In this box over here, Verizon is producing 30, Singular 40, whereas in this box here, Verizon produces 40 and Singular 30. So I've just placed the profits that both the companies are going to earn in each of these situations. You can see that if both produce 30 and 30, both will be earning a profit which is equal to 900, which is the highest profit, right? So this must be the collusion outcome. Both the firms cannot do any better than this outcome. And you can also verify this going back to this example that we did. You saw that this was a starting point. This was the collusion outcome where both are producing 30 units and enjoying a profit which is 900. Okay, so I have just placed that outcome in this box here. Okay, and we then this box here, the last box here, represents the oligopoly outcome, right, where both are producing 40 units and earning a profit of 800. And this is like the two intermediate situation where Singular is producing 40, Verizon continues to produce 30. So that's this outcome, and similarly you can work out what this payoff matrix, what this payoff box represents. Okay, so the point here is that although this is the best outcome, but both will have an incentive to cheat. You know that okay, so in order to figure out the dominant strategy here or the Nash equilibrium here, you can think that if Singular, okay, think from the perspective of Verizon first. Your company is Verizon. If Singular produces 30, what is your best strategy? If Verizon continues to produce 30, its profit is going to be 900, but if it increases its production to 40, its profit is going to increase by 1000. Okay, so what's our conclusion? If Singular produces 30, Verizon is going to compare its payoffs, and the highest payoff occurs at this point where Verizon is going to produce 40 units. So this is going to be the best strategy for Verizon. Okay, now assume that if Singular deflects from the agreement and if it increases its production to 40, what will Verizon do? Again, Verizon is going to compare its payoffs. And where does it get a higher payoff? Again, it's getting a higher payoff when it increases its production to 40. So we have a dominant strategy here. Whatever Singular does, Singular, if it produces 30 units or decides to increase production to 40 units, the best strategy for Verizon is to produce 40. Okay. Now, similarly, think from the perspective of Singular. Yeah, now you're Singular. Now, if Singular believes that Verizon will stick to the agreement and produce 30 units, Singular is going to compare its payoffs. If it continues to produce 30, its profit is going to be 900. If it increases production to 40, its profit is going to be 1000. What would Singular do? Of course, it's going to increase its production to 40 and increase its profit from 900 to 1000. Okay, now the other scenario, if Verizon increases production to 40, Singular is going to compare its payoffs. So we are in these two boxes here. Singular, if it produces 30, this is its payoff. If it increases its production to 40, this is its payoff. What would Singular do? Comparing these two, it will definitely increase production to 40 and make a profit of 800. So the conclusion is that whatever Verizon does, whether it stays with the agreement, whether it stays true to the agreement and produces 30 units, or whether it reneges or deflects on the agreement or cheats on the agreement and produces 40, the best strategy for Singular is to produce 40. So what is the conclusion here? The best strategy for Singular is to increase production to 40, no matter what Verizon does. Similarly, the best thing for Verizon to do is to produce 40, irrespective of what Singular does. So both will end up producing 40 and 40. Both will end up with profits of 800. So this example clearly illustrates that even though this is the best outcome, 30-30 is the best outcome, but cartels are very hard to maintain. And if this cartel breaks down, and if A and B start to act independently, they will they will come to this point where both will be producing 40 units. So this example actually illustrates that any strategic game, it can be translated into this payoff matrix, and once you are able to do that, you can easily then figure out what is going to be the oligopoly outcome. Visually, it's easier to figure out the oligopoly outcome as compared to the table that we illustrated. Via this table we were able to achieve the same outcome, but the process was a little tedious. So I'm just saying that if you can convert whatever we have done in this table format in that payoff matrix form, it's going to be easier for you to figure out the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so that's in the next part, we're basically going to do some more oligopoly games or game theories, some games which are played or that can be translated in this payoff matrix, and you will have to identify the cartel outcome and the Nash equilibrium in each of those cases.